You must be getting used to hearing applause these days. But it's fair to say, I think it's been a long and hard road to get where we are 13 years later. But I think we'll perhaps start at the beginning. When did you first become aware of Lance Armstrong?
My first experience with Lance was in 1993. I was writing a book on the Tour de France, a book that would be called Inside the Tour de France. And my aim was to kind of write a Canterbury Tales type book on the Tour de France, where I would get different people within the race to tell their story. And Lance, I saw as the neophyte story, the rookie, guy on his first tour. And I interviewed him in a really nice hotel outside Grenoble on the rest day of the 1993 tour. And at that time, I wasn't thinking drugs, and perhaps even Armstrong wasn't thinking drugs. And I have to say, I was really impressed by the guy. He was incredibly ambitious, driven, and I wanted to see him as a young star. And I use a line in the book that, you know, I wanted to be the journalist getting into the lift on the ground floor with the guy who was going up. Now, I remember I was traveling on that tour with Paul Kimmage, and when I left Armstrong, I just couldn't wait to get back to Kimmage to tell him, you know, gee, this guy Armstrong, he's really something else. You know, I asked Armstrong about how he felt at the end of a race. And he said, he said, my eyes kind of bulge out. He said, I start screaming. And he said, I just feel this incredible surge of power, adrenaline. And then he stopped and he thought, and he said, at that moment, he said, I think about my mum. He said, because she didn't raise a quitter. And he said, I'm never going to quit. I'm never going to give up. And I just had this sense of, this is a guy who's going to go somewhere, who's going to be somebody. I went back to the tour in '99. I remember the Sunday Times made the decision that I would cover the '99 race in its entirety because we wanted to see what kind of a race it was, because the '98 race had been such a scandal. So when I went back in '99, I went back with two suitcases. One of them had clothes and the other had skepticism. The skepticism one was heavier. A young French writer, Christophe Basson, was doing a column for Le Parisien newspaper. And Basson said, you know, in this race, you can't finish in the top 10 unless you're doping, because nothing much has changed. And I remember that. I thought that was incredibly courageous thing to say. I thought it was actually something that was maybe foolish, because Basson was going to get in trouble for that. Other writers weren't going to like it. He was going to almost ostracize himself. Basson was here. Armstrong was here. Basson was totally anti-doping. And I felt you couldn't be anti-Basson and be anti-doping. You know, if you were against Basson, you were ambivalent at best about doping. Armstrong was violently against him. And I just thought that stank. I didn't have doubts in that first tour. I had an absolute conviction he was doping, honestly. It wasn't doubts, because I was in a car with 3 journalists, and I tell you, we discussed doping for 6 hours. And I was an absolute pain for those guys, because I just kind of non-stop, you know, dog with the bone, horrible. There was John Wilkerson was in the front passenger seat, and he didn't want to believe anything bad about Armstrong. And it was just torture for him to have to listen to me. But my feeling was that there were clean guys in the race, and they were being utterly screwed. And I felt like a crusader, and I was there to defend them. And to say, we can't believe Armstrong, and if we do believe Armstrong, we're going to screw all the clean guys. And so I had an absolute conviction. But you're absolutely right, I had no proof. And it's kind of a dangerous position for a journalist to be in, to totally believe something to be the case, but to have no way of proving it. Alan basically wrote a line that said, because the '99 tour was faster than the dope tours that had preceded it, there were some who found it difficult to believe that Armstrong could do this clean. Now, just as Edie said, that was tantamount to saying he was a doper, and you now have to prove he doped. Now, there was no way, if the Sunday Times had spent 10 years, we could never have proved Armstrong doped. Just think about it, how could we? We got a video of him in his bathroom, and he's got a syringe in his arm, and he says it's vitamins. And we can't prove it's not. So even the video with the syringe in his arm is no use to us. So, but my feeling was, if we can't say that riding the Tour de France faster than the dopers is suspicious, when we know the doping product is EPO and blood transfusions, And we know it increases performance by a huge margin. If we can't say it's suspicious when the next generation come along or the next year come along and beat the dope times, if we can't raise a red flag about that, well then it's just completely ridiculous. It's a libel law that is going to totally suffocate the truth. And Emma O'Reilly, who was a tremendous source for all the work I did, she used to complain all the time. I can tell the truth in America. I can tell the truth in France. I cannot tell the truth in the country in which I'm a citizen, the UK. I got an opportunity to go trekking in the Himalayas. And I was up at a little station called Gora Shep, which is about 2 hours kind of south or down from Everest Base Camp. And there was snow all around, and it was really cold, and I was in this miserable kind of single-man tent, and it was freezing. And it's like 5:30 in the morning, I'm totally awake and I can't sleep. And there's a little click on my phone, because you can still get mobile phone up in the Himalayas. And there was first a text from Paul Kimmage that said, Landis has made this huge confession. He sent emails to all the top people in cycling detailing every line of the US postal doping. You know, he said, detail like we've never seen before, totally convincing. And I remember thinking, yes, huge moment. And then, of course, about another 5 minutes pass, and I get a phone call from the Sunday Times sports editor, which begins with the sentence that I would come to know very well. I know you're on holidays, but... The thing about Lance was, although he was a very bright guy, I always thought his brightness was analytical rather than emotional. And he didn't understand where Floyd Landis came from. Floyd Landis, as most of you will know, I'm sure, was brought up by Mennonites in a very strict kind of Christian kind of background. And I was doing that story, and I'd come across and remembered a quote from a character in The Wire, D'Angelo Barksdale, who said, you always go back to where you came from. You know, it doesn't matter what you do in life, you cannot get away from where you came. And Floyd Landis ultimately couldn't get away from his Mennonite background. So when he tried to get back into cycling, and he reached out to Armstrong looking for a new team, and Armstrong said, no, you've got a bad name now, Sonny, you're a loser. Well, Floyd thought, okay, you know, there's another side of me, the Mennonite side, the side that says right is right, wrong is wrong. What we did as cyclists was wrong, and now I need to get it off my chest. And that was the beginning of the end for Lance Armstrong. Some people with questionable backgrounds and questionable ethics have got to the head of sports. And this isn't just cycling. You know, if somebody said to me, would you like to see a change at the head of world football? Would you like Sepp Blatter to be moved from his position? I would say, how quickly can we do it? And if you said to me, would I like to see Pat McQuaid taken away as head of world cycling? How quickly can we do it? But it's not easy. There's something greater out there for Bradley Wiggins or Chris Froome or whoever. And the greater prize is to win the Tour de France when everybody knows you're clean. And that wasn't the situation with Bradley Wiggins this year. And it must be very frustrating for him to know that there are people out there who are not sure, people out there who even think he may have doped. Because that's the situation cycling has got itself into. But we only have to look at the times of the race now, as opposed to the times that Lance Armstrong achieved, to know that this is a more human race. This is a race with much less drugs, because they're just going significantly slower. As for the photograph on Twitter of him lying on his couch with his 7 jerseys around him, you know, if I were being really polite, I'd say, Lance, hold on. You're the guy who removed from your Twitter profile 7-time Tour de France winner. So what's it with these 7 jerseys? Given that you now admit that you're not the 7-time Tour de France winner, that's if I were being polite. If I weren't being polite, I would say, Lance, I'm not saying for a second that you're in any way like Adolf Hitler. Of course you're not. But this looked to me like Hitler in his bunker with his generals all around him. You know, last days stuff. I just thought it was a sad photograph. I thought it was a bit pathetic. What was he trying to say? I just thought desperate.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you for coming.